Now that we have a good understanding of how the server-side infrastructure in an ASP.NET Zero application works, it's time for some exploration of the client side of things. So, in the next part of this module, we are going to explore the Angular part. As a small recap, let's take another look at the overall architectural diagram that we looked at in the beginning of this module. We just explored the ASP.NET Core part, so the server-side part. Let's now turn our attention to the Angular part, so the part on the left. The typical flow will be indeed that the Angular app will connect with the backend first to perform authentication based on a token. Once that's all good and the user has successfully been authenticated, the user modules within the Angular app will perform API calls, passing in the token so that the server can validate the calls and only allow them through if they are authenticated. We'll look in more detail at the authentication used in ASP.NET Zero later in this module. Just like a regular Angular application, ASP.NET Zero contains several modules. There is one application-level module, the root module, used for bootstrapping the Angular app. This can be found in the main.module.ts file. A very important module is the account module. As the name gives away, this module will contain the logic for the authentication-related features such as login, registration, password reset, and so on. Next, we have the app module, which basically wraps all other modules in the application. By default, it contains the main module and the admin module. Through the pages inside the admin module, users will be able to manage users, roles, languages, settings, and so on. These are already pre-created for you. Next, we have the important main module. Here we will be creating our actual application. When you have just generated your application, it will contain a sample dashboard page that we've already seen. I hope you remember. Of course, that page is there just for demo purposes. You can delete it. Your application code will typically contain multiple smaller modules. That's the recommended approach to work, so you can lazy load functionality on demand. Modules will typically be accessible through a route. For example, /app/admin for the admin module. As mentioned, Angular supports lazy loading of routes, meaning that only when the user browses to that part of the application, the related code will be loaded. That, of course, brings with it a faster startup time for the application. When our client application loads, of course, it needs to know where its backend is going to be. This information is available for the Angular application in the appconfig.json file in the remote service base URL setting. The other related setting you can see here is the app base URL, which is the URL the application itself runs on. That's a setting which the application typically will need to know if it runs in a multi-tenancy mode. Before we go back to the demo, I want to zoom in a little bit more on the default modules which we already touched upon briefly, so the account module and the app module. And let's start with the account module. In your source code, you will be able to find this module under the account folder. The account component is the root component for the module. And in the account routing module, you'll find the different routes for the subcomponents. In this module, you'll find several pages and components which will give you application account functionality, including login, registration, forgot password, and email activation. The default built-in UI that comes with ASP.NET Zero already looks very nice. Here you can see an example of the login component. If we configure the application to support multiple tenants, from this screen it will also be possible to make the tenant selection. A change of password option is also built in. And on this screenshot, you can see the registration page, secured with a reCAPTCHA so that bots will have a harder time registering for the application in an automated way. A key is required to use this from Google, and that key should end up in your appsettings.json file. It's not shown in this screenshot, but ASP.NET Zero also supports social logins, which can be configured from the backend of the application. Once configured, they will show up here in the UI. ASP.NET 0 also has support for two-factor authentication built in. In these times of security breaches and account theft, that's definitely a good thing. By default, it's disabled, but you can, as an administrator, enable it for the website. Support is included for email, SMS, and the Google Authenticator verification at the time of the creation of this tutorial.